Hello there, civilized people. Oh, the world is in quite a state, isn't it? And there is a lot we could talk about. We could talk about the election, but there isn't really much to cover right now, say for Biden possibly not making it onto the Ohio general election ballot, which, if we're being honest, he wasn't going to win Ohio anyway. We could talk about how laws have been passed which define anti Semitism, is including anything which states that Jews killed Jesus. You know, like the New Testament. We could talk about how setting yourself on fire in protest is no longer just for Buddhist monks and is becoming the meta for how to protest properly. We could talk about matters like that, but why bother when our listeners are truly distinguished and want only the most important topics to be covered? Topics with trillion-dollar consequences and hundreds of thousands or perhaps even millions of lives on the line. So activate your kung fu grip, mount your little pony, load your Nerf gun, and prepare to roll initiative. Because today, on the Goths and Rome podcast, we are going to address the most pressing matter on the planet, a toy company. So, Colton, how are you doing today?
I'm pretty all right, Robert. How about yourself?
Back to pretty all right this time.
Yes.
I can't complain. It's been a pretty good day for me. So, a toy company. Yeah, clearly. What has the world come to? I just don't know. But and I feel like this is basically like another series. It's going to take a while for us to, fully process. Like we wanted to continue the AI thing, but the situation surrounding that is just evolving so rapidly that like we can say something one day and the next day be proven utterly wrong. So, sort of want to protect our integrity there. But I think that in this case, the topics that this would evolve into have progressed far enough to where there are things that are set in stone, more or less. And now, to listeners who might be wondering why in the Sam hell we are talking about a toy company, well, the reason is actually pretty simple. Because Hasbro, and which is the topic of this video, and through them their subsidiary, Wizards of the Coast, which is going to be far more of a talking point, are excuse me, they are a truly spectacular case study for a lot of the problems that you see in the entertainment industry as a whole, which, as luck would have it, is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. The difference, though, is that in this case, these entities are small enough and with a niche enough and easily definable enough audience and products that we think they can be more easily digested to allow these problems to be seen on a small scale so that you can in turn, start to see them on a larger scale. Just to put it into perspective a bit, Hasbro is worth about $8.5 billion, dollars, meaning it is worth roughly the GDP of the African nation of Togo. Now, I'm not going to hold it against you if you can't point out Togo on a map. Honestly, I don't even know if a lot of people know of Togo as being a nation. But meanwhile, Disney sits at a net worth of about 15 billion, which is more than the GDP of Hungary. I believe it's by about $2 billion, which Hungary is a well-developed European country. Sort of puts into perspective how valuable Disney is. But Hasbro has in the neighborhood of 4,600 employees, Meanwhile, Disney has 35,000 employees, and that is just in its park in California alone, and has more than 250,000 employees across all properties which it directly oversees, not including its retained contractors or all of its global subsidiaries. So, given how many fewer moving pieces there are in Hasbro than Disney, this sort of feels like a stepping stone so that we can make big problems more understandable. And I'd like to think that's kind of our goal today, Colton. Don't you think?
Well, I'd hope so.
I like some of these large corporations are very much a very complicated series of like it's like a spider web. It's all interconnected. If you touch something one place, it moves. But Hasbro is just much smaller with a much less web-like structure, so you can sort of see things a bit clearer. Or I'd like to think you can. But before we get into this, really, I feel like I need to put on my professor hat for a bit so that I can address a few statements that I commonly see in association with, people complaining about something that a corporation does or says. Because just given what I've seen, a lot of people on the internet, believe it or not, don't seem to know much about corporations. Does this in any way surprise you, Colton?
No, a lot of people don't seem to know a lot about a lot.
This is true. So, first off, what is a corporation? Well, the answer is pretty simple. A corporation is a for profit enterprise which is publicly traded, meaning that you, yes, you, can purchase stake within that company. It is also obligated to follow relevant corporate law, which is one of the wings of business law. The other notable one being just general business law, which governs LLCs, which we're not really going to go into. So don't worry about, a long talk on legal precedent or anything like that. We're not lawyers, nor do we claim to be, nor do we want to be, I think. I,
God, no.
yeah, like we have standards. My apologies to any lawyers listening. Next up, a thing I commonly see is this is an evil corporation. Well, not really. A corporation is not sapient. It is not, making its own decisions. It's not even, a single mind. A corporation is best defined as a collection of, laws, bylaws, and shareholders who vote on things with a vested interest and a moral obligation to generate returns for the shareholder at a competitive rate. And that competitive rate bit is going to be important going into the next part. The third thing I commonly see is why are corporations so greedy? Well, uh, contrary to what a lot of people say, one of the biggest reasons that corporations are so greedy as it happens to be is taxation. Also, more taxation, and a whole boatload of taxation. So, just to, lay this out, this is pretty much a worst case scenario. But for the sake of arguments, let's say that without taxation, you would have received a dividend payment of $100 on your investment in a company. All right. So that's what you would get without taxation. So then you are hit with federal corporate taxes. Now, corporations are taxed twice. Any earnings are taxed twice. First for corporate profits, and then for payouts to shareholders. So when federal corporate taxes hit, that $100 is now $79. Oh shit, things get worse if your company's in New Jersey too. Bad luck. State corporate profit taxes and take that $79 down to 70. So what would have been $100 has now been reduced by 30%. But don't get too comfortable. Uncle Sam isn't finished with your money yet, because this is about to get a lot worse. Oh, say you live in California. Some terrible news for you. That $79 is now $68. And depending upon the type of investment, when the federal government hits you for your capital gains, that $68 now becomes $49.50. What does this mean? It means that in order for a corporation to be viable to investors, it needs to grow your investment at a far higher rate than something like a bank. But tax them more. I'm sure that will make them less greedy. It, it's just a function of the way that taxation system works. Next up, and I think this is one that we've both seen screwed up very frequently, is corporations doing corporate stuff does not equate to corporatism. I mean, you're from a generation that constantly gets that incorrect, Colton.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's not the same thing.
There.
Corporation,
Go ahead.
yeah, yeah. Corporations doing corporate stuff is it's just doing general business things. Um, what thing is, a corporation is a publicly traded company, and they have an interest in cultivating value for shareholders. Pursuing that is not corporatism. What corporatism is when a nation state is controlled or heavily influenced by certain industries or certain sectors of industries to the point that it influences policy. And a purely hypothetical example would be if Congress was lobbied by the military industrial complex to give money to a country, just hypothetically as Ukraine, so that Ukraine could then hypothetically spend that money buying weapons from the aforementioned military industrial complex. Now, rest assured, I am certain that your favorite news station isn't heavily invested in by companies who are also heavily invested in the military industrial complex, who insist that a specific slant be provided to world events to make you think there is some clear delineation of good or bad, so you develop moral attachments to a specific side of a debate. But obviously, that's not real. What are we? Conspiracy theorists?
Yeah, you're kind of sounding a little bit third rail there, Robert.
Ah, besides, we aren't here to talk about trivial matters like that. We are here to talk about an important issue facing society today: a toy company.
That's damn right.
Yeah. So that's the difference between corporations doing corporate things. Corporatism is, you know, pulling the levers of power with financial influence. They are very different animals. So I guess we should sort of dig in on Hasbro. And we did a bit of research into the company. And despite all of the hate and vitriol thrown at uh, Hasbro, at least at present, is an example of a corporation that is doing a lot of surprisingly smart things. And look, I know that the hatred of Hasbro runs deep. but simply calling something that you hate stupid or expecting a corporation to magically collapse is it falls somewhere between silly and delusional. And I see that a lot. So Colton, just offhand, uh, what do you think it would take for a multi-billion dollar corporation? What kind of mistake would a multi-billion dollar corporation have to make to collapse completely with no chance of recovery? Just
Um,
throw out an example.
Tanking a beloved franchise for 500, Robert.
That's not even enough.
Ah, dang it.
Uh, I'm going to go with they open a orphan meat harvesting factory that's open air in the middle of a populated city, so the whole world can see it.
But do they still provide the beloved, franchise?
They could or couldn't. Like it just has to be something truly heinous. And even then, there's no guarantee that a corporation would collapse
Yeah,
entirely.
I was just thinking. I'm like, if it's good enough,
I
people might
mean,
still defend it.
the thing is that it is an organism of sorts with a lot of hearts and a lot of heads. You take out a few, it'll probably survive. So it's not as simple as that. If it damages, if its arm is damaged, it can cut it off and sell it to another company. That's the way corporations work. And sometimes that's beneficial. Sometimes it doesn't even need to be damaged and they'll just get rid of it. They're tired of that right arm and they want a new one.
Relatable.
Yeah. I mean, who hasn't? I mean, every morning, I wake up and, I call the hospital to see if I can get, just new kidneys. They ask me if I have a condition. I say no. And I just tell them, I want fresh ones. And then they hang up on me for some reason.
Yeah, you're
But
obviously a better
within the,
donor candidate than the other ones on the list because you take care of them.
yeah,
You don't have anything wrong with yours.
I know. I know. Exactly. See, I take care of my kidneys. The I'm actually pretty good to my liver these days too. Now
Wow,
that I think
Robert.
about it.
Pinnacle of health over
Yeah.
there.
Well, with my proper Southern diet of deep fried everything.
So, anyways, corporations cutting off an arm and replacing it.
Yes. So just looking at Hasbro in general, just the things that we can look at and say, yes, they're doing this right, and no, they're not. And keep in mind, we are looking at things that are specifically Hasbro. There's decision making at a lot of levels within a corporation. And as it relates to specifically Hasbro, those decisions are your C-suite decisions. And you have, your various subsidiaries, and then those also make internal decisions. So in looking at this, we are just looking at Hasbro decisions. So the first thing we looked at was just a slate of roles that are in the C-suite, which are your chief executive officer and the people essentially that directly report to them and have enough sway in the company to be very financially significant. And Hasbro does have a very functional slate of C-suite roles. Uh, like we're not commenting on any individual or their talents in this, but just speaking candidly, over the last few years, you have seen a lot of really stupid positions that have been elevated to C-suite prestige and C-suite pay. And look, I'll say it plain. If you are a chief diversity officer or chief inclusivity officer, a chief HR officer, or a chief analytics officer, with very, very few exceptions, you shouldn't be, listed in the C suite. Uh, something like that should be subordinate to a subordinate of whoever is on, you know, your chief executive board. I I I'm having trouble thinking of a case outside of maybe a company where you're doing business in a lot of countries and you need people to be somewhat interchangeable, where a chief HR officer would really be necessary. And a chief analytics officer, I don't know. I'm assuming maybe in a company that's hyper specialized within data, but even then, it seems like they would be a direct report of someone else that would be on the C suite. But as things stand, Hasbro has a CEO, go figure, a CFO or your chief financial officer, a CRO, a chief revenue officer, a chief of global supply chain, or a chief global supply chain officer, which that's your logistics and supply chain department. The president of toys, licensing, and entertainment. Um, Given that they are historically a toy company, it makes sense that they are there. A You have the chief legal officer. I'm not sure how I would feel about being locked in a boardroom with a lawyer, but I mean, I've had to spend plenty of time around lawyers, I suppose.
At least this one is theoretically on your side.
Yeah, theoretically. And your chief comms officer and your chief information officer. And, you know, the chief information officer, I'm not sure on, but by and large, all of these make a lot of sense. These are all positions that, make sense to be there. So it seems that as there's been a lot of, push to sort of expand the C-suite beyond what it really needs to be to simplify decision making, uh, they've clearly resisted that movement to elevate non-essentials to that prestige level. Which on that end, Colton,
Yes.
too many chiefs, bad for the tribe.
Yes, too many chief make Grug not know what do.
Exactly. As such, we regard this as a good thing. So, props to Hasbro on it. Next off, and this one is admittedly a bit sad. Just this last December, Hasbro did do a very large layoff. Layoffs aren't happy, but they aren't new. And with changing trends in tech, these things happen. And it is cold to say that people losing their jobs is a good thing. I am aware of that. But I am speaking about this from the world of a corporation functioning properly and generating returns for its investors.
Hmm.
That's the world I'm coming from when I say this. Hasbro is a toy company. Since the advent of video games, the toy industry has been dealt a pretty heavy blow in value. Ask a kid whether they want a GI Joe or to play Minecraft, and smart money is on them choosing the latter. Hell, dare I say, smart money is on an adult choosing the latter as well. But this was a long time coming. Layoffs should have happened probably upwards of a decade ago, but Hasbro, across all of its subsidiaries, only laid off 1,900 people, which is about 30% of their workforce. But they still did it. They still held out for a decade, is sort of what I'm getting at here, before they actually did those layoffs. So yes, it is sad. This happened a few weeks before Christmas, but an uncomfortable reality is that these layoffs were justified, and they were justified for over a decade. It's not saying anything ill of the people who were laid off. It's just that the climate of that industry has changed. And going to this, I don't like painting decisions by a corporation as being right or wrong morally. Again, unless they're, selling orphan meat or something like that, which is just truly heinous. But this honestly seemed like a case of a company holding out to try and do right by its employees. I'm not aware of what went into the decision making for this. But that being said, this needed this layoff needed to happen simply because of changing trends. And it isn't something where morality should be injected. Uh, it was something to remain profitable in the eyes of shareholders, because without those shareholders, more people would lose their jobs.
Hey, Robert,
Yeah.
you want to finish this point, and then we take a quick fill up the drinks and go to the bathroom break?
All right. Yeah. Go ahead and put in the cut here, and we'll pick back up here in a minute. All right. Sorry about that break. Turns out a little alcohol is always beneficial to a conversation. So, Colton, in looking into this layoff, believe it or not, I did find something disastrous that might have prevented it.
I'm ready.
But, and look, I will be honest, I was looking for something to hit Hasbro with. But again, this isn't it. Hasbro is one of the big suppliers of toys for Disney. And during the height of popularity for the Disney Plus show, The Mandalorian, and also surrounding the release of The Last Jedi, apparently Hasbro didn't actually manage to get several toy lines to stores uh, during the holiday season, when they would have sold far more, presumably,
Hmm.
just because that's when stuff sells. And that is worthy of being chastised. But again, I can't actually fault Hasbro. The reality is that this problem had absolutely nothing to do with them. As it turned out, this issue was caused because Disney, or Lucasfilm, refused to give them the materials needed to produce said toys in time for the holiday season. I mean, look, I think we both sort of wanted to do this video as a way to, break down the problems with Disney. But even in doing this one, we have found screw ups by Disney
Hmm.
just because they work with them. And truly, truly, Disney is the cancer of the modern corporate landscape. Um, so yeah, I can't actually fault Hasbro. And yeah, like this is something outside of their control. And what the hell, Disney? But yeah, it is entirely within the realm of possibility that had, you know, you had two more successful holiday seasons, you might not have seen layoffs on such a scale. That is entirely possible. But damn it, Colton, why does this keep happening? Why
What, you
why
look
why
for
is
something
it?
bad about Hasbro, and it's not their fault?
No, but it's like anytime we look at something, like anytime you look at a company that does any business with Disney, some of their biggest shortcomings have to do with their relationship with Disney. It never fails. Never fails. Like I am absolutely bewildered.
Hmm.
I mean, I don't know the average age of our viewers. I have to assume that most of them grew up with, Disney stuff around, and you see it branded everywhere, and it has just become that poorly run. I like it dumbfounds me. But that's enough on chastising Disney on this, because as it turns out, Hasbro, it seems, sort of got their revenge. Chris Cox, the CEO of Hasbro, and otherwise known as the guy who stood up to Disney and told them what he thought of filling warehouses with toys that nobody wants to buy. Um, this may seem minor, but just to add some context in this, all corporations compete with all other corporations for investors. Walmart is competing with, you know, companies that produce guns for the military. Uh, Disney is competing with, you know, oil companies to get money from investors. And because of that, if you're dealing, corporation to corporation, there is still some degree of competitiveness. And if a small dog pisses off a big dog, you know how that story ends. But somehow, with Hasbro being the equivalent of an aging teacup chihuahua that has lost all of its teeth, and Disney being Cujo, Hasbro came out on top whenever Chris Cox met with them. Not to get too into the weeds here, as Disney is its own can of worms, and we will certainly do a video on them. But they are not the cherished company they once were. And its films are no longer universal blockbusters, with every child in the country wanting every toy for every film. Disney, whenever they made their agreement with Hasbro, had them pay a licensing fee to produce those toys. They instructed them to maintain a minimum stock of those toys and to produce merchandise of certain varieties, essentially for all films they released. And it's worth noting that any contract with Disney or another corporation of that size is essentially a Faustian bargain, or, a contract with the devil. Because let me be clear, Disney's legal department is better than yours, unless you were a government, and even then, not always. The fact that Cox had the balls, pun intended, to stand up to Disney, even when he had the advantage, speaks a lot for his leadership. As even with every advantage, that is not a renegotiation that he should have won. I there is I would never have put money on him having any success there, just because of who he was negotiating with. And for those of you interested in the specifics of this, I am not privy to the conversation that transpired there, but the general summary that I have, come to understand is that Chris Cox basically informed Iger and his people that in their weakened state, as Disney is in a weakened state, nobody would make toys for them to make those delicious merchandising dollars. And at the time period when this was done, Disney was on the hook to buy Hulu in the first quarter of this year. And you had a looming hostile takeover attempt by way of of Nelson Peltz, or essentially what amounted to a hostile takeover attempt from Nelson Peltz. And they needed every penny they could get. So instead, Hasbro renegotiated the terms very much to their own advantage. And I cannot overstate how unlikely this was and how significant of a win this is. I don't know many companies that have gotten a beef with Disney and come out on top. And yeah, I I cannot overstate how significant this is. But yeah, it's still kind of dumbfounding to think about, just coming from the world I come from. I don't really have the words to convey how significant that is. But so far, we have talked about things that fall into Hasbro's camp. And there are others, but again and again, it, keeps turning out to be wins for Hasbro. And again, while Colton and I both know that there is real hatred for Hasbro, the reality of the situation is that we just couldn't find that much that they had screwed up all that badly. The fact that they delayed layoffs as long as they did almost indicates that they may actually give a damn about their employees. I mean, seriously, we know that shitting on Hasbro is like throwing chum to sharks these days. We know that people eat it up, but we can't, in good conscience, really do it because any notable decisions that Hasbro has made uh, recently uh, are generally good. And yeah, so if you were wanting us to, tear Hasbro apart, I'm sorry, but so far we have only talked about Hasbro problems. And while Hasbro problems are Hasbro's to fix, Wizards of the Coast problems are Wizards of the Coast problems to fix.
Oh boy.
Oh, sweet mother of Christ. Ah, God.
It might be more succinct to just, put a list of what they've done right.
Uh, yeah. Give me a second. All right, I gave you the list.
I'm ready.
No, I just gave it to you.
Oh wow.
It's a very short list. Like there is next to nothing that I can point to that they did right, that they didn't screw up royally to begin with.
Well, let's
And
let's let's hang. Let's go back a little bit for a second. What are some notable things that Wizards of the Coast oversees for people that might not be familiar?
all right, okay. So there are essentially three wings to WotC. You have digital gaming, Magic the Gathering, and Dungeons and Dragons. And of these, digital gaming is currently doing very well indeed. But it's sort of the new one to succeed. But Magic the Gathering and D&D, sweet Christ. Uh, things went really, really well. And then they sort of, you know, I don't know, they decided to LARP as lemmings and dive off a cliff. It gets bad. And you know what, Colton?
Hmm.
I've done it again. Lemmings don't actually jump off of cliffs. God damn it, Disney. They actually did a documentary where they were like shoving lemmings off cliffs to claim that they did that.
That is horrid.
That's another, huh?
That is horrid.
I know. It's like, why Disney? Like, we can't escape it, Colton.
Wow.
Sorry, sorry to if you've ever thought that lemmings actually do dive off of cliffs. I'm afraid not. In that old film, they were actually sort of being swept off the side of a cliff and into the ocean because documentaries need to be entertaining apparently. And what's more entertaining than animal cruelty?
We're just kind of blinking
Uh,
like blankly.
yeah, I know, I know,
That's Jesus.
I know that that's very old. That's very old. Walt was probably around during that even, and I don't know. I doubt he was even aware of that. But anyway, Colton, I want to start this section by asking you a question.
Okay.
When is it acceptable for a company to take a side in the culture war or give the appearance of taking a side in the culture war?
The answer is never.
You nailed it. M- Mostly, if you're Ben and Jerry's, you can get away with it. If you are a gun manufacturer, you can get away with it. If you have a target audience that is very, very sort of uniform ideologically, you can get away with it. But does do you think that both sides of the political divide play card games, Colton?
Yeah, I'd say they
Do
do.
you do you think that both sides of the political divide play tabletop games?
Yep.
Yep. And just for the record, what do you do with employees who seem determined to make your company take a stance in the culture war, or seem determined to give the appearance of taking a stance in the culture war?
I mean, me personally, I'd fire them.
Exactly. That is precisely how you handle those. You get rid of them. They are financial disasters waiting to happen.
God forbid they become some sort of spokesperson or
I
community
know.
manager.
I know. God forbid. But, you know, suffice to say, Watsy did not take any of this advice. And so we're going to go back a bit. Just going back in time, folks. The year is 2007. It's April 7th. And Wizards of the Coast, best known for the card game Magic the Gathering, purchases TSR, the owner of Dungeons and Dragons. In 2008, Wizards of the Coast released their own edition of D&D, 4th edition of the game, which is broadly viewed as a disappointment. During this time period, WotC marketed their new edition by largely telling people it was simpler and easier to use than the previous edition, while simultaneously trashing the previous edition and a lot of the things that made the game popular with its audience, which were the original fandom, a fandom which had been around for decades and was not insignificant. Suffice to say, fourth edition was having a rocky start, and the relationship between those who had been players for the first 30 years of the game and WotC had a similarly rocky start. At some point between 2008 and 2012, I was not able to get a very precise date on this, just evidence that it had happened. But during this period, in an effort to no longer throw money at fruitless endeavors, uh, Hasbro sort of takes the leadership of WotC out behind the woodshed and has it come to Jesus talk with them in the name of preserving shareholder value. Hasbro labels Magic the Gathering a core function of WotC's operations, and D&D a non-core aspect of WotC's operations, resulting in Hasbro essentially barring the investing of profits from Magic into D&D. So you can no longer, make money in subdivision and invest it into another project. Just to keep it afloat. The D&D team was given an ultimatum to meet a minimum profit margin within a certain time period or be dissolved. I do not know for certain what that time period was. But fast forward to 2014, WotC released the 5th edition rules for D&D, not making use of their marketing to candidly just shit on the things that many of the older players loved. The game began to very quickly grow in popularity because the system was far less complex and easier to pick up than earlier editions, which in a lot of ways did increase accessibility and did seem to actually grow the audience. In 2015, a stream called Critical Role started, catching the interest of many young people and again further expanding interests in D&D as a whole. Fast forward to 2020, the fear of the beer bug has spread across the globe. People are working from home, social distancing, and people are slowly going mad from cabin fever. People turn to streaming services to alleviate their boredom. And one of the most popular shows, Stranger Things, prominently features D&D as it was in the old days. Suddenly, the game has even more interest. While it still attains a fraction of the profits, well, it still only attains a fraction of the profits of Magic the Gathering, it has become a very valuable brand, resulting in Wizards of the Coast garnering far more importance within Hasbro. During this time period, D&D changes dramatically and becomes something of a global sensation, as with the use of virtual tabletops, friends can play and socialize together despite the lockdowns. Against all odds, the what was essentially viewed as the very, most niche element of geek culture became mainstream. A game which had largely been written off by its creators as a financial footnote had emerged as a cash cow. And oh yeah, baby, it was time to milk that bastard cow for all it was worth. So, while not terribly significant, something worth mentioning in this ongoing situation. May 2021, uh, one of the books released for D&D as a supplement. It's not often cited, but there was a good bit of conversation around this. This book was, what is it, Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, which a lot of people, even who don't play TTRPGs, are familiar with that setting because it had a lot of spin-off video games in the 90s and I believe early 2000s. But it was a horror setting and it was historically popular enough to have those video game spin-offs. And hell, it actually, fun little tidbit on that, it actually spawned its own choose your own adventure book. Now, Hasbro, is a family friendly company. So suffice to say that when it came to a horror setting, it didn't really capture what was there in the original. Now, Colton, I think for the sake of a, toy company that makes things for children primarily, that, avoiding, rampant use of certain horror tropes in a product might be wise. Would you agree?
Yes, but it's the one thing that we talked about earlier, where it's you have this core fan base, and the core fan base are kind of the gatekeepers of enjoyment, if that makes sense. Like,
This is true.
if they enjoy it, then they'll sing its praises, and they're invested on in the community, and like it'll probably be talked about on like Critical Role or something similar, right? And people will
Yes.
talk about it. It'll generate from the core fan base. That excitement will then trickle out to other consumers. But
Yes.
if
Correct.
if you lose that core excitement, then all you have is just milk toast.
Yes. Honestly, if I'll be candid on my side, if I was Hasbro, I probably would have forced the same thing, just because I have to protect that family friendly image. I
And
get that.
that's kind of like the downside of the notoriety of the suffering from success, if you will, of suddenly now
Yes.
you're watched over.
Yep. And just from reading old, conversations of people talking about this, some older fans were skeptical, but most people don't seem to complain too much. Um, in fact, most people sort of assume something like this would just be corporate mandate, uh, which, that was largely seen as inevitable. I mean, you know, it, go, go online somewhere and find a copy of the Book of Vile Darkness from a few editions ago. And, I'm sure Hasbro would just love, if Watsy put out a buck with, I don't know, drug dealing and necrophilia mechanics.
Oh my.
Oh my, indeed.
Uh,
Truly, truly, bo- bo- body mutilation at its finest,
yeah.
got to have mechanics for that.
By the way, before we get too far away from like kind of the story of D&D emerging, right, as a popular source of fiction, and right.
Yes.
I don't know if you're going to talk about this later, but I was just going to bring them up, and stop me if you're going to talk about them later. But obviously, Baldur's Gate 3 came out, which it was
Yes.
the
We will be getting to that.
unanimous. Oh, okay. That was
We,
like,
w- we, that, that actually comes into their, at the very end. That is another kind of problem, uh, which it's not so much a problem, but a sign of a problem.
okay.
Like,
And
that
then,
probably saved their asses this year.
yeah, and then one more thing, which was the Dungeons and Dragon movie, which I don't even know if it was good
Oh
or
yes.
bad, but I know that
Oh,
came out.
yep. That's part of the same problem. We're touching both of them in this.
Is okay. Just wanted to make sure
We,
that we didn't like just forget about those.
yeah, we'll talk about the new one, not the old one. I think everybody that saw the old one wants to pretend it didn't exist.
Oh,
It was
I
that
didn't even
bad.
know there was an old one.
Yeah, if I think I think that a lot of people would like to forget it.
Oh, so
But get, getting back to, Hasbro, putting certain restrictions on what can be published, as like, as I was saying, like, Hasbro is probably not going to let, any subsidiary produce anything that, talking about dealing drugs or necrophilia. I mean, that's pretty much common sense for, a company that overwhelmingly deals in products for children. I I get it, in the same way that I have to assume that Mattel is probably not going to, start putting out snuff films,
Jesus.
or Disney probably isn't going to start releasing, direct to home use movies of hardcore pornography. Admittedly, I'm not saying Disney won't. I mean, I don't have much expectations for them now, but I wouldn't. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if they did that in the future. But it's not something they would have historically done.
What the hell is going on in your mind, man?
Like, I
Fair
like
enough.
we're like we're talking about problems with this, but it's just like at the same time, it's like yes, this is happening there, and it's just 1,000 times worse. It's the same problem, but it's just 1,000 times worse. So, moving forward from there, October 2021, book called Wild Beyond the Witchlight. Uh, from what I can find, this appears to be the first case where WotC sort of dipped its toes into the culture war. And I will say it did it very discreetly. Uh, Apparently, the book had two characters who were labeled as having the gender of non binary. It was tucked away inside it somewhere, largely ignored, and it didn't really cause much pushback. So, in that case, it didn't really poke the sleeping bear of the culture war too hard, seemingly. So, moving on to that, December 2021. Um, the D&D side of the house and the Magic the Gathering side would sort of, I guess, work together to release products that sort of co-marketed. And in December of 2021, they released such a product. It was by no means the first, but it was, from the numbers I can find, the most successful. That one I believe is called Strixhaven. But a lot of these had just fairly underperformed and gone without notice. This one succeeded, and from everything I can find, it was marketed very, very well. It was one of the few examples of very good marketing. Move forward a few months to February 2022. WotC is ascendant within Hasbro. Chris Cox, who has been the president of WotC during the dramatic growth um, of what is now a very valuable IP, was tapped by the powers that be to don the mantle as CEO of Hasbro. So, yeah, this sort of, gaming side of Hasbro had grown enough to where the president of that was tapped to run the entire corporation. So that's pretty impressive. And I believe it was right after Critical Role started that Chris Cox became president of Hasbro. So he had been there through that entire growth, pretty much. Which cultivating that was sort of a success. I can't deny that win. And well, here's pretty much where everything goes to shit.
Boy.
And I would like to point out, because the more I read this, like the more I kind of like Chris Cox, because all of the problems that happen here on out aren't Hasbro problems. They are entirely WotC problems. You didn't really have these problems when he was running what? Ah, Lord. Whoa, boy, folks. All right. So,
Well, quick
July.
question.
Yep.
Is there someone notable that replaced Chris Cox as the president
Yes.
of WotC?
Yes, yes. We'll be talking about her in a little bit.
And
But her name was Cynthia Williams.
okay,
She came out of the I think digital gaming side of Microsoft. She sort of rose to
Ooh,
prominence in Microsoft during the high times of microtransactions, and I believe she was also involved in Amazon early on as well. I don't have all of her background written down,
so a
but
certified
trust.
money leech from the straight from the business school rather than the creative side of the business.
Yep. Don't worry. She's going to come up again at the end
Oh boy,
of going through this glorious timeline of rampant stupidity.
I'm ready.
So anyway, she is tapped to replace Chris Cox. July 2022. Watsy throws caution to the wind and says, "Screw it. We're jumping into the culture war." Yeah, I I'm never it never ceases to amaze me how companies willingly seem to do this, Colton. Why do for-profit enterprises hate money?
So I guess in
Do you have an
that
answer?
um ideological backing and money, I don't know. Like the I'm gonna do the normal layman answer of BlackRock money. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't know.
Fair enough.
I am reluctant to say what exactly. Like, there's a lot of talk on that side of things, and maybe we'll delve into a little bit more. I'm inclined to say that if it comes from somewhere, it would come from that.
Hmm.
But anyway,
Well,
in July of 2022, uh, Watsy for D&D released a book called Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, something like that. Which, all right, let me be very clear. This came off as BOM the Adventure.
well, I have a question real quick about this.
Right?
I mean, I have many questions, but I have one leading question. The leading
Yeah.
question being like, all right, so you said before how there was like, I guess for lack of a better, I'm just gonna use the term representation, right? Where it's like the two non-binary characters, right? And like some
Yep.
more stuff that was like that it just flew under the radar, right?
Yeah.
And that could just be like, one of the writers maybe, wanted to put in some representation and it wasn't like over
It
the
wasn't
top.
glaring.
Yeah. It
It
was
wasn't
just like,
glaring.
just the writers, one of the writers, just putting in some representation, right?
Hmm.
Now with this Radiant Citadel, is it entirely different tone where it's like from the
Oh
down,
my
like
god.
from the top of the corporation being like, we must put this social message in?
Oh man.
I have not played this, so I'm just asking.
Uh, I haven't either. I've read a bit of the book.
Well, is
I've
it
read
like that
enough.
obvious though?
Let me put it like this. It features very prominently a lot of the ideologies that were being advocated for by well, I'll speak candidly, the progressive movement in the wake of George Floyd's death.
So like, there's no city
And
guard.
there is no city guard.
I'm trying to translate that into like fantasy. I'm like, so there's not a city guard.
There's no city guard. Like
Is there a thieves
labor,
guild
I think there's like labor rights, like some kind of like labor organizing and things like that.
in a fantasy like setting?
Yes, if you've got unionization.
Huh.
And the thing is, look, I'm not trying. I'm not doing this to like judge the content. That's not what I'm looking at here. I'm looking at this purely as a business function. Now, historically, I believe it is fairly safe to say that the majority of players for this game are generally white and male. I think it's safe to say that stereotype exists for a reason.
Yeah, I'd agree with you.
Uh, it's also important to note that older the older somebody is, the more disposable income that they have on average to buy a product. At least that's generally the common logic. Would you
Hmm.
agree?
Yep.
So, speaking specifically of you know these people, so with older people who have been buying a product for decades, do you think it's safe to say that they are more reliable consumers?
Yeah.
So we're talking about people that have been playing this for 30 years, so they're certainly middle aged at least, and they're overwhelmingly white and they're overwhelmingly men. Do you want to take a just take a stab about what you know logic and statistics would indicate about their worldview and ideology?
I don't even need to go that far. I would just go and say I don't relate to this at all, and this one's not for me, and I'll sit it out. Do a home vote or
Kind
something.
kind of. They that I mean, it's no secret that wing generally swings overwhelmingly conservative, which looking at conservative men, they overwhelmingly disapproved of that movement. And thing is, whether this was intentional to sort of push forward an ideology or whether it was the function of the writers wanting to do that, everything from the marketing, which was talking about, oh, the races of the writers, to some of the content inside of it gave off the appearance of corporate pandering. Though in this case, done by the subsidiary instead of the corporate leads. And in that moment, whether it was intentional, whether it was not, Watsy had sort of dived headfirst into the culture wars. And how does that usually end, Colton?
um, Losing approximately half of your user base.
Generally, yes. Or not necessarily half, but probably a good quarter.
Yeah, that's probably more reasonable.
Which, which, if it's unfortunate, if it's the side that has, your more reliable customers, well, you lose like about 25 to 50% of your customer base. But the problem is that if you lose your longtime customers, you lose what are essentially your patrons versus your customers. Uh, think of it as if you owned a bar. A patron is the guy that comes in every night and has a beer. The customer is the guy that comes in with his buddy and gets drunk every 6 to 8 months. You really like that customer when he's there, but that patron is what keeps the lights on. And this was an instance where you had seen sort of Watsy diverge from, will take a stance that could be deemed very unpopular and was likely viewed very unpopular by those longtime players. Well, longtime customers, patrons. But yes, that this was sort of the first area where you really saw something happen, and you did see pushback. Uh, The sales were, I, Lord, the sales were down very much on this one. Give me just a minute. I actually want to look up the sales on that real quick,
Hmm.
because it was horrendous. Let me see. All right. Uh, Now, admittedly, this isn't a huge number. Nothing that they sell has a huge number, but in its initial 2 weeks, it sold 7,123 copies that were sold in brick and mortar stores.
Hmm.
That's abysmal when you consider that, other titles around the same time sold much better. Give me a second. I want to pull another one up.
Yeah.
The Strixhaven one I mentioned, in a similar time period, Strixhaven sold 18,000. So it underperformed Strixhaven by 11,000 units, which is not a good place to be.
And when did Strixhaven come out? Like what year?
It came out a 6 months before it.
Oh, okay. I thought it was like years before.
No, 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 no. I believe it was the next release afterward. But like that ought to put into perspective just how divisive that was. Because so going back to it, once you kind of play these games, the impact on one side of your business takes can impact another. So like we're not grading content here. We are just, looking at perception and how that can impact your financial prospects. So that was disaster number. What do you think of disaster number one, Colton? First thing they do, join the culture war.
Well, you've already kind of made 30% of your audience kind of wary of whatever you do next, so that's not ideal.
What do you mean by that?
You know, the people that immediately write it off as going like, "Oh no, more culture shit," right?
Yeah.
They're gonna
Well,
be like, I don't. You got one more chance, bud." Yeah, you know.
okay. Well, the next one, believe it or not, the major problem in it is not actually culture war related.
Oh.
Look, look, folks, like this goes far beyond the culture war. Far beyond the culture war. So immediately, like a month after, so August 2022, literally a month after Radiant Citadel, Watsy decides to sell some nostalgia. And in this case, it was Spelljammer. Now, there was some criticism for racist images in there. But in this case, there was also criticism for missing mechanics. Spelljammer seems heavily inspired by, old sci-fi that doesn't take itself too serious. And, if you're running a game for a ship that's in space, instead of, just two people duking it out with swords or guns. What other kind of combat mechanics do you think would be necessary, Colton?
Combat mechanics or mechanics in general?
What kind of combat mechanics other than, just two people, shooting or
Well, ship to ship combat, maybe like
yeah,
orbital combat. Like,
exactly. And you know nothing about
no.
that setting. It came out well before your time. And let me just I mean, you nailed it. That is something that is completely necessary. And guess what it completely lacked?
Are you serious?
Yes.
So what are you guys supposed to greet each other on your ship radios? You know, being like, "Oh, do you fancy a duel today?" On the on
Yes.
the on the hatches of our ships
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. There were no ship-to-ship combat mechanics
at all.
at all.
Like, there's no. It doesn't even.
Like
They just forgot it.
like there's, hit points for the ships, but there's no rules for how to, control stuff and
If
what
there's no
speed they
hit
go.
points for the ships, how could this ship
There
take
there
damage?
there are hit
Or no, I mean,
points.
if there's nothing, if there's no ship to ship combat, how does it take damage? That's what I meant.
I don't I mean, if they're like, I don't know, you board it and you
And you what
stab it
you
really vigorously.
yeah you slash the walls with your. Is it like a
Exactly.
lightsaber? I don't even know. Do you just break the walls?
Kind of.
How
I
does
mean,
that
you
help?
have you have siege weapons on these, but there's no rules really governing turn order whenever you're moving. I mean, if they just stand there stationary, I mean, I suppose you can just shoot at each other with
Well,
siege
if
weapons
there's
that
no
you can do.
rules, then how do you decide who's in range?
The weapons have range, but there's no rules governing, the turn order, how the ships act and when. Like it's completely missing.
There's not even like just a header that just says like, go look at our other book in the past and like just use those rules. There's nothing.
I mean, honestly, like a page that just said mechanics and then like had hand scrawled in crayon, fuck it, just do it yourself, would have probably been more useful than what they gave us.
They could have just been like, dude, just play X Wing. Like for the
Basically.
ship to combat, play X
I
Wing.
mean, just yeah, just I don't know, go play I don't know what, Star Wars Battlefront back in the day. Just use the results of that to figure out what happened. Go play some video games.
The winner of the spaceship battle shall be decided by a game of diplomacy. A full
Yes,
game.
yes. So now we've gone from they've entered the culture war and they have completely skipped out on something integral for a product to function properly.
And is Spelljammer like a big IP, for lack of a better word?
It had a lot of nostalgia around it, and they were selling it largely based on nostalgia, which is a pattern you're going to see.
Yeah, with a lot of companies.
Yep, those member berries.
Yeah, apparently.
So it's August 2022. Now we move forward in November, and you know
That's
what?
that's not all that long to make another mistake.
Oh, dude, like they are going to be like you can't let 3 months go by without them fucking up something.
I mean, anything to stay in the news, right?
Well, in and keep in mind this isn't just like D&D. This next one's Magic the Gathering. So in November 2022, they released a box set to commemorate, anniversary of founding of the game. And let me see. I want to find out how many cards are in this.
I'm just gonna guess 60. That's my guess.
Uh, let's see. 15. I believe it's 60 cards.
No way.
I believe it's 60 cards. I'm not sure exactly. No, excuse me. There's more than that.
Oh, I was about to say, like, that's after thinking about it, like after I said it, that's a really low amount of cards.
297, I believe.
That's a really weird number, but okay.
I'm just looking this up. I'm probably wrong. But guess how much for their anniversary box set? Guess how much they were charging?
Around about 300 cards,
That's what I have to assume. That's what I
and
think it
and
is.
it being Magic the Gathering,
Yeah,
$700.
1,000.
How?
Moreover, for cards that you are not allowed to use in play.
There's only like one Magic the Gathering card that I think I know, and it's like Black Lotus or something.
Yep,
Like that's the
and
only
it's
one.
and it's not going to have the same value as the.
Kind of lame.
Yeah. So also keep in mind that again, what makes this bad is that Watsy has taken a side in the culture war, and now they are pushing. I mean, what does it cost? 3 to 5 cents to make one of these cards.
Yeah.
It's negligible. We are talking about well over 90% profit on anything, and given that the progressive wing that they sided with in the culture war is generally kind of opposed to anything that looks like corporate greediness. How do you think they took this?
Well, I don't think most of them play like Magic the Gathering, so eh.
I don't know. I don't know. But suffice to say, it got a good bit of pushback. It's still available if you want some. Like, I mean, if you want to order, $1,000 worth of unusable cardboard, knock yourself out. But things like that, it, for example, there's nothing wrong if you are listening and you can sell, $3 worth of cardboard for $1,000. By all means, please do.
Good on you.
Good on you, and please teach me your magic because I need to know it. I've got a lot of cardboard and a lot of spare time. But that being said, this is something where just because of stances they had taken, which appealed to certain people, all of a sudden, this was sort of like a swing of the pendulum where it didn't really appeal to the other side, but it pissed off the side that, they were sort of playing their hand for. So this this one, I'm not sure the full scale of how this one happened and how it played out. But I don't think it helped the situation. Would you agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, one second, Robert. I think I have to pause for a second.
Right? Go. Right. So after the cards, how long do you think they went before they had another fuck up, Colton?
Well, based on the track record that you've given me, I'm going to say another 2 or 3 months.
1 month.
Well,
Of
okay.
course. Why not? Why not? So in December 2022, Watsy commits a cardinal sin of the business world and of managing a successful brand, which is that you don't make major alterations to lore or otherwise of a beloved IP. And they did that with Dragonlance.
Make
And
alterations to lure what?
to lore, Lore.
Yeah, to lure what? Like other like non-fans?
Uh, I'm not sure what you're getting at.
Well, what did they make the alterations to lure in? That's what I'm asking.
Not not Lulo, like
Oh,
lore.
lore.
Yes, lore.
Oh, okay.
They made alterations to lore. Uh, Dragonlance, more than being just tabletop, Dragonlance has a whole slew of video games. Uh, if you were, these were before your time, but the old Avalon Hill war games, there was one of those for Dragonlance. And there are a lot of books. And what's important in fiction to remember is that lore, I hope I'm coming out as people hearing Lore and not Lure,
Well, now you're
but
enunciating it a little
lore,
bit more.
lore. But lore and expectation of that is a lot like product recognition and the expectation of that. And I'm going to give an example. Suppose, if you would, that the Big Mac is discontinued for whatever reason, and 10 years later, McDonald's decides to re release the Big Mac. The name alone inspires memories of what once was, and so people who remember it go to get it. But McDonald's has decided to take creative liberties with said burger, and it is now made with vegetable paste instead of beef, and instead of special sauce, it's just doused in chicken soup. Now, obviously, with a game between editions, rules change. Rules also change with a Big Mac, specifically how much it costs for you to get it. But what makes a Big Mac in the eyes of the people who loved it is what comprised it outside of that aspect. But in the case of, so essentially think of, what comprised that product as being the lore. And so if you mess with the lore of something like this, it's not what people remember. And people, at least the ones that remember it, tend to be dissatisfied. This just comes down to brand expectation, which, going back to the Big Mac, that has value. If you go to a McDonald's in London and order a Big Mac, you know what you are getting. If you go to a McDonald's in China, you know what you are getting. If you go to a McDonald's in any country outside of India where beef is illegal generally, um, you know what you are getting. And so building up that brand recognition so people know what they are getting, and if they like uh, Big Mac in Montana, they're going to like one in Florida. And this is a way that you sabotage. And this is generally a really stupid decision to make. And while this is sort of a gross exaggeration of what happened, um, it would be like going to see a movie called Jurassic Park 5 only to find out that it is an autobiography of Malcolm X. It wouldn't make any sense. Or like going to see, a Jurassic Park movie and finding out that it's about bugs. You know, that's a thing that happened. But anyway, I digress. Once you have a product that has expectations, it's best not to diverge from those expectations. You can improve upon content, but you don't change the core of what is there. And believe it or not, in the case of Dragonlance, the one thing I see this the most about, Colton, is that in classic Dragonlance, you could not play as a cleric. And that is allowed in 5th edition's glorious take on it. But that is something very significant to the background of that setting. So it pissed people off.
Okay.
And this is also only the first problem of December 2022, by the way. We've got another one
Oh.
because things just keep getting better. I told you, like, we got the culture war out of the way real quick. The next is that during this time period, WotC products begin to suffer some kind of issues with their logistical network. And it's only really WotC products. Their Dragonlance book had essentially like a board game that came with it, because Dragonlance is a war game
Mm-hmm.
at a heart. That is really what it seems to strive to be. And so it has a war game attached to it to emulate battles. And well, a lot of people pre-ordered this, and apparently nobody told the company that was taking over to handle deliveries, because people were contacting this company for weeks and still not receiving their product, to the point where people were getting this product 3 to 4 weeks late, 3 to 4 weeks after their promised delivery date. So what we are seeing is the initiation of a track record of not communicating well with contracted parties.
Mm-hmm.
There's not much information on this, but it is something I found, and it is something I've read. But there we go. We're finally done with the first year of this debacle, Cole. How do you feel so far? How do you feel so far?
Well, it seems like they're developing a habit of not catering towards their, core fan base.
Yeah,
I think that,
and
large picture, sums it up.
for those of you who are listening, you know full well what happens in January.
In January?
January 2023. Like, they're not even a
You
dude.
keep you keep cutting out, Robert.
Oh, in January 2023, that's when probably the most controversial thing on this list happens.
I'm ready.
Uh WotC, in their infinite wisdom, wanted to repeal essentially the open gaming license and replace it with something very one-sided. Essentially something that, even though it wasn't implemented, crippled in a lot of ways third party content creation, which this is one problem here,
Robert, we
because
gotta pause again.
sorry about that, folks. Had some technical difficulties. But anyway, with the OGL controversy, essentially WotC had purchased the online marketplace that sold the majority of content for their game that was produced by third parties. In doing this, they essentially scared people away from producing the third party content that the store that they had invested in sold. But because that's not bad enough, they also managed to push away a lot of the more prominent creators of content for them, including Critical Role, one of the people that, well, one of the groups more accurately, that had put them on the map and grown them to the size they were now, who have also since released their own game, directly competing with them. So they, while WotC ultimately did have to backtrack, this, at least in my eyes, is the first sort of signs of some looming financial problems. Because to put it simply, the OGL situation is very it has very dubious legal standing because rules cannot be copyrighted. So it almost seems like more of an intimidation tactic. And certainly they can sue somebody and make them go bankrupt and just force them to fight it out in court to drain them of money to make, sort of strong arm people into following their rules. But ultimately, that was backtracked. But it certainly has caused them more problems in the long run. So, Colton, tell me honest. If you bought a shop that intimidated all of the people that sold you goods into not producing them anymore, and then also convince them, but also say your biggest supplier, you convince them to start their own shop to compete with you. Do you think that's a good business maneuver?
I would have to go with no.
Yeah, I would too. Um, I mean, I get why they would want to do this. It essentially allowed them to to not necessarily seize, but utilize things which third parties had created for their own interest. And I mean, I get why a company would certainly want to do that. I mean, if it was within my power, I probably would. I mean, sure, it's evil, but who doesn't like money?
Especially free money.
It's free money. Hell yeah. They're just making shit for free that I can sell now. Um, but yeah, like evil. I think in this case, evil is actually kind of right. Like they're like it would have. It's borderline malicious intent. I feel. I can understand the financial side, which is why I'm not sure I definitely want to say just outright moral issue because they do have the obligation to make money, and if they're not making money, the only way I can see it is not evil is if they are in a very bad financial situation. Let me put it like that. But we'll get to their financial situation later on. So, just to review their glorious accomplishments as of January 2023, they have given the appearance of taking sides in the culture war, pissing off the right. They displayed a lack of quality control in their products. with Spelljammer. They have given the appearance of corporate greed, pissing off the left. They have ruined a perfectly usable brand by modernizing it. And they have now completely devastated their third party component market, which they profit from, turning longtime cash cows into open competition. And we're just in the first month of 2023.
Ugh.
So, Colton, now this next one sort of goes to culture wars again, but it can't be overstated just how bad of a look this was. I'm just going to say this out and just give me your honest response afterward.
Mm-hmm.
On a podcast, Kyle Brink, an executive producer for Wizards of the Coast, is quoted as saying, "There's been mistakes been made. There's been mistakes made. Excuse me. There's been mistakes made in years past where people assumed D&D players were all, white dudes in a basement, which has been a faulty assumption for a lot of years and gets more and more false every day. And so, in my viewpoint, honestly, guys like me can't leave soon enough for this hobby." Him being a white guy.
Is that the full quote?
That is the full quote.
But why? Who has given him the order? Now, I'm gonna assume that he's a normal person, right? Who's given him the order that he must self-flagellate and go through a humiliation ritual?
So, I mean, we've already established most of those older players are, in fact, they're overwhelmingly white guys. Those older players, by virtue of being older, tend to have more disposable income. Those older players are also your patrons instead of customers, and they are your reliable source of income. And he basically just told them to fuck off.
For what reason? Like, who asked him?
I I don't know. Like they're like this.
Was he fired?
No,
What?
I know. I told you this just keeps getting worse, Colton. Even if this was taken out of context, and this is what I find around on the matter. Maybe it was taken out of context, but the fact that this quote is in there enough to be taken out of context, they should be fired anyway.
Yeah. If you don't get fired for that kind of statement, the company looks like they're endorsing that message.
Yep, and that's kind of the problem. So now we can add pissed off longtime patrons of business to their long list of glorious decisions.
You could even just simplify that to like hostile against some of their core audience. Openly.
Hostile toward
Openly
Openly
hostile.
hostile toward core audience, toward longtime patrons. Because I do feel you have to distinguish between a patron and a customer in this instance.
Okay. All right.
All right. So, Colton,
Hmm.
you ready to make things even worse?
Surely, like, it can't be that bad.
Oh man, Colton, Colton, come on now, man, please. I mean, we're comparing these people to Disney. To Disney. Like it's gotta get worse.
What happened next?
So they got through March without much for major controversy. But then April came. Isn't it glorious, Colton? April came,
That's not that long.
and a fellow named Jeremy Crawford, game designer for Wizards of the Coast, announced that all half races, like half elves and half orcs, will be removed from Dungeons and Dragons because WotC sensitivity readers consider half races to be inherently racist. The change has sparked a debate over the game's allegedly racist past. Fortunately, just for my own reading, for all involved, there is some data on this matter which confirms that even in a highly biased poll trying to find people who will view this as racist, only around 10.2% of people would say that anything like this was even remotely racist. Presumably, the other 89.8% of people were just as baffled by this as, we are.
I don't. So what was their
That's right.
proposed like change? Was it like, all right, anybody that is a half race is now just one or the other race?
No, they were going to include new mechanics, but they wanted to get away from using the term, half elf.
Who is bothered by half elves? Are there any actual half elves to be offended?
I don't know,
Or
but
I don't even think a half elf would be offended. Are there any pure blooded elves around
I,
that
I
are
mean,
offended?
I mean, but keep this in mind. Sensitivity readers consider half races to be inherently racist.
Do they
So
not like the NBA?
I I good God. Like there
What is
there
a
is so
sensitivity reader?
a job that probably shouldn't exist is what it is. Somebody that reads through something to make sure it's not offensive to people.
So what is the job application like for that? Just like how thin skinned are you?
I think so. I think so. Like uh does like how do you have your hair cut and what color is it? Is pretty much the only question on the application, I assume.
Do you often feel rage at the behest of others?
Yep. How much do you hate yourself? But yeah, so apparently race mixing is racist according to Wizards of the Coast.
That's coming from a real different angle from the other people that think
I
race
know.
mixing is bad.
I know, right?
I just
Like what the absolute hell?
do they not like real biracial people?
I mean, I can't tell whether like this is serious or whether they got their sensitivity readers from the Klan.
They, like are they do they just walk down the street and see a light-skinned guy and they're just like the purity of my race? Like what? And it doesn't matter which race you're coming from, you know?
Yep, yep. According to Watsy, uh, we, 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 we must maintain racial purity according to Watsy,
You know,
because otherwise it's offensive.
I don't just to take a
Oh,
step back, right? And it's this, just to come back, right? There are other fantasy universes that have, you know, decided on what to do on the half race problem, if you will.
oh God! Oh God!
Now,
Oh God!
what a fucking term,
But
by the way. What a term,
but I
by the
mean,
way.
at least in Watsy's case, their final solution was to get rid of them.
They don't exist. They never exist.
My God! Because clearly, I told you, Colton. This just keeps getting worse and worse.
What a that even though that's only in the context of their game, right? Of their setting. That is such a wildly off base just ruling from them. Just in terms of reality, right? But uh, what I was trying to say a little bit ago, but
Yeah.
other fantasy universes have, their own rules for that. I'm sure you could tell me the Lord of the Rings one afterwards, but I'll just say the other major fantasy video game universe, right, which is the Elder Scrolls.
Yeah.
There is no half races in the Elder Scrolls either, despite there being half racial characters in the games. But according to the rules or the lore, is that all of the offspring of a different race relationship are the mother's race, and that's just it's simple. There's no arguing about it, right?
Yeah. In D&D, at least from the lore I know, it was that if you're more than half something, you're that. And in Lord of the Rings, the only real interbreeding that you saw between races was humans and elves. And the first generation of that would essentially get the option to choose whether they wanted to live as a human or as an elf. And that determined whether they were mortal or immortal. Like Elrond in, you know, fairly well-known character from that franchise was half elven.
Mm-hmm.
He was called Elrond half elven. But yeah, so
Not to be
God,
confused with L. Ron Hubbard, creator of Scientology.
yes, yes. Which, I mean, for all the mistakes that has, I don't think they have tried to explode as hard as WotC has tried to explode.
God, what a joking aside, what who prompted them to do this? Their sensitivity
I,
department, I guess.
I, and yep, like I am so dumbfounded at the moment.
And you have to think about the process that went through. That all right, the sensitivity department, maybe a couple people passed it up to their higher up, right? And their higher up put it in a report, and then someone took that report seriously enough to go to the writers, and the writers were like, "Yeah, that makes sense."
Yep.
This is multiple layers of corporate bureaucracy that
I
nobody was
like
like, "Wait a minute."
this was a failure on so many levels.
Ugh.
So many levels. Oh man.
I'm surprised they weren't laughed out of the building.
They said they had a debate over their allegedly racist past, but I hear there's some optimism for their allegedly racist future.
And aren't half elves like the
Yes.
most played?
Yes. I think so.
Nobody
That
in
or
the
human.
offices, nobody in the offices played a half elf, really. Everyone was like, "Yeah, that makes sense. Let's scrap it."
Kind of.
Ugh,
Ah, man. But yeah, they're apparently, creating something where you essentially build your own race, I guess.
that doesn't sound like that could go horribly.
Oh, I'm sure it won't be broken at all.
The Build-A-Bear racial store.
Build a bear race. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh god.
What would you like the fuzziness to be made out of?
Oh god. Oh, there is no appropriate way to answer that question.
Ugh.
But, you know, moving right along. Well, recently, as some of you might know, and we got to go back to the Lord of the Rings here for a minute. But Amazon released a glorious little show called The Rings of Power. Honestly, if you haven't watched it, congratulations. Mission accomplished. You are better off for having not done so. But more importantly, Amazon paid well more. I think they paid almost $1 billion for the rights, and then $1 billion, like half $1 billion per season to film this. And their first season, so a project that cost them $1 billion, of all the people that watched the first episode, the first 2 episodes, I believe. There only 37% of them had actually finished watching the series. The thing is, while the show isn't entertaining, if you go onto YouTube and look up the trailers for the show, the comments section is actually divine. I highly endorse, a quick reading of it. It's hysterical. But the thing was that Amazon wound up pissing off the the fans of the wrong series. I believe, other than the Bible and what is it, Mao Zedong's book that was mandatory in China, The Lord of the Rings is the most broadly read piece of literature in the world. And quite honestly, they tend to be very, very devoted. So, in May of 2023, just a month after, Watsy had determined that, race mixing is racist. God, you can't make this shit up. Uh, Watsy decided that Amazon, that was cool. Let's follow in their footsteps. So they released a Lord of the Rings set of cards for Magic the Gathering. And suffice to say that Tolkien, who had put in a great deal of work with everything from weather patterns to ethnography to, I believe, even geology, like the man went into a great deal of detail on his lore, would probably be less than thrilled with Watsy's new wonderful creations, such as Black Aragorn, or Black Theoden, or ambiguously Asian Gandalf.
Ambiguously Asian?
He kind of looks Asian. I'm not gonna lie. He kind of has that, like, you know, wise monk at the top of a mountain with the long pointy beard thing going on. At least in what you can see of him in the card. Which, all right, this is minor, but this is like the one fandom you really don't piss off.
He is ambiguously Asian.
I know, right? But it's like just another stupid decision to throw onto the fire. And then we get a little break, Colton. We get a little break.
Mm-hmm.
And this one is not so bad, and I actually understand the reasoning of it. But so far, we've pissed off the right, we've pissed off the left, we've pissed off our longtime customers, we have pissed off the largest fandom in the world, we have pissed off the people that produce content we sell, we have turned our, people that produce stuff for us into open competition. And in August 2023, Watsy decided, screw it, let's piss off artists too. Because in one of their books, Glory to Giants, something like that, it was abundantly obvious that several of the pieces of art had been created using AI. So instead of hiring artists, they were just using AI, which, I get it. It's much cheaper. But yeah, if you're a company that, makes, like, if you produce cards like for Magic the Gathering, you own that artwork. But if it's created by an AI, you don't own that artwork. You can't copyright something created by AI. So now you've got people that, how to put this? Artists are fickle. I'll go into my opinion on working with artists later as we get to some of the other problems there, or what I view to be some of the problems there. But this was a company that contracted out for artists. If you are asked to create artwork for a company that is using AI to produce art, are you really going to, give that your all? Are you're working for a company that clearly is not interested in the, like, true artistry of it, I would say. So I guess looking back at our AI video, it looks like artists are getting hit now, at least.
No.
This happened before our first video, but it's an example of it. But yeah, so now we've got pissed off artists, people that this company works with pretty extensively, given all the artwork in the books and on their cards. Or maybe not so much anymore. Who knows, really? Then we get September and October off in 2023, Colton. We get those months off, largely free of fuck ups.
Well, I mean, this is 2023, right?
We're still 2023, yeah.
Well, I mean, there was. Are we only going over their failures?
Oh, we're going to get to Baldur's Gate.
Because that's pretty significant, probably in the fiscal year for them.
It is, but it's not something they did themselves.
No.
It was created by a third party, which is why it's not something they can really take that much credit for. And they negotiated it well before this. So, moving along. November 2023. You have a new release for D&D delayed by 2 months. It was specifically the Book of Many Things, which came with a deck of cards. Now, for a company that got its start printing cards, between the books and the cards, which do you think they would screw up, Colton?
Well, I'd think they'd screw up neither, but you're about to prove me wrong.
Yep, the cards were misprinted. A company which overwhelmingly makes money by printing cards couldn't do this right. But things get a little bit worse. And this is somewhat conjecture, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it. But it has been postulated, given that the cards that were misprinted were produced in China, and you don't really have the same communist countries, or countries that spent long periods under communism don't typically have, like, very good copyright law, because you couldn't really own a copyright. It was public property. So go figure, China does not respect copyright law. But it is postulated that the cards that were misprinted were then sold online instead of being destroyed as WotC instructed. So yeah, they printed with a company overseas that, it's not confirmed, but appears to have likely sold those copies back into the US to third parties to sell online, undercutting the value of their own damn product. by shipping it overseas.
Hmm.
Isn't that fun?
I mean, that seems like it's more like the Chinese printing company's fault than Wizards of the Coast's fault.
I mean, you're dealing with a company in China, you know what to expect.
Yeah, you probably should have just paid for your shipment. That way, you have all of the stuff.
Yes. Like that was just a gross oversight. So that's it for 2023 outside of what we're going to call good news financially. So Colton, let's talk about their glorious financial year. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
So at the end of 2023, uh WotC reported that, and Hasbro more accurately reported, that WotC had earned $1.5 billion that year.
Mm-hmm.
Presumably, that is before taxes. But there's some problems with this, Colton. There's some real problems with this.
Let me guess. That they didn't actually make any money.
It's how this money was gotten. So, first off, 2023 also saw Monopoly Go, which is a part of the digital department at Wizard of the Coast. I believe it's produced by a third party, but they get a fairly large share of the profits, as I understand it. But Monopoly Go, not Goal. I constantly screw that up. Monopoly Go. It earned $2 billion last year, Colton. Two
Mm-hmm.
billion. Now we don't know what percentage of that goes to WotC, but presumably they're getting a sizable chunk of that. Probably upwards of 20%. That's a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know the exact percent, but it's going to eat into that 1.45 billion that was literally just got by them not from things they produced in house. Then you had Honor Among Thieves, the D&D movie. It had a budget of 150 million, and in the theaters and the box office for it was 208 million. Now you might be thinking to yourself, "Oh, that's a profit of 58 million dollars. That's good." To which I've got some really bad news regarding this. What nobody talks about is that the budget for a movie does not include marketing. It does not include marketing. And the general rule of thumb for marketing is that your marketing budget is going to be anywhere between 50% and 100% of the cost of the film. So that takes the actual cost of this film up to 225 to 300 million. The other part nobody talks about is that 208 million is the what the theaters take in. And I hate to tell you, but theaters also have bills to pay. And some companies, specifically Disney, are known to get a higher take of the cuts because they produce so much. They can demand it. So they might get 60 or 70%. But being generous, at most, uh, WotC only got about 50% of this, meaning that you are at bare minimum looking at a movie that had a budget of about 225 million with a return of only 104 million. Now, whatever portion of that went to WotC is in that 1.45 billion we mentioned initially. But all of the expenses for it were paid in previous years. And the marketing budget was most likely largely spent in the previous fiscal year, meaning that this was just purely profit. But this profit came with a hefty loss attached to it. So it was a net negative. And then, like, I know you're wanting me to get to Baldur's Gate 3,
Mm-hmm.
but there's one more thing ahead of that. you are you're starting to see Watsy's products at places like Ollie's, which are clearance shops. Uh, Now, if you're selling something to a clearance store, you might break even, you might make a little bit of money, you might take a net loss, but you are frequently this stuff is coming from a place of a net loss already because you are having to pay for the footprint to store it. And it's just been sitting there and you need to get rid of it. So you have been sitting on this product, and just by virtue of having it in stock as opposed to, something else in that footprint, that is eating money. So likely as not, you are seeing a bump in revenue from them just dumping a lot of product onto clearance market. But in reality, they are probably losing money on it, even if they sold it for, even if they sell it for, their cost to manufacture, they've still lost money on it from the cost of footprint. So again, that's a big injection of money, but it came at a net loss. Now, Baldur's Gate 3. Colton, how many copies of Baldur's Gate 3 had sold by December of last year?
By December?
It
When
was
did
something
it
like,
come out? Is it like August?
yeah, it was something like 300 million copies.
It's pretty impressive.
I think it was like 300 million copies.
I was gonna
Maybe,
guess like 70.
I don't know. Let me look it up real quick. Um, any copy? No, excuse me. It's 10 million copies. Wow, I
Oh.
was way overestimating that. But still, 10 million copies. Each copy sells for, you know, $60. Let's say Watsy gets 20%, so $12 per copy. That's $120 million that Watsy got. That it's a guess of what percentage they got.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually currently inclined to think it was higher than 20%. And we'll get to that later on, as we've got to talk about, in glorious news for this coming year, we've got to talk about Larian's choice in whether or not there will be a Baldur's Gate 4.
Or even kind of finishing Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah. So, among other glorious news of just this year. But suffice to say, Lord, that's another $100 million that comes off of that. And so, that 1.45 billion keeps shrinking. And, you know, the digital side of operations, there's only so much overhead, and it generally pays back, or so it seems. That side of the business, just by virtue of Monopoly Go, would have covered its costs, barring horrible negotiations on the part of the people organizing their cut of it. Then you have the fact that Baldur's Gate 3 injected a huge amount of revenue with it being developed by a third party, which is, as we'll get to in a bit, it's a one hit thing. It's Flash that brings in money, but nothing else. And also, the, let's call it probably around 104 million that they received, presumably from Honor Among Thieves, actually came with, a net negative of at least 121 million attached to it. So it's a net loss as well, with a net loss of 225 million attached for an overall net of negative 121 million. So, given the losses associated with these and that they are not repeatable, reliable income, this isn't boding terribly well. It's the numbers are seem to be inflated because you've had disproportionate success in a part of this operation that is not related to the two functions they are known for, which are Magic the Gathering and D&D. And a lot of profit came from third party creation, or was profit if only if you ignore the losses of previous years. It was not a net profit. But of course you don't present it that way to shareholders. That would be very foolish. You want those investment dollars. But suffice to say that rumors of financial success might be a bit exaggerated, and specifically as it relates to something like D&D. I mean, what does a pack of Magic the Gathering cards go for, Colton? What, $5 to $7?
I wouldn't know.
I don't know either. I don't play, but I'm going to go on the grounds that it's somewhere around there. And sure, maybe they sell it to stores for $3, and it costs them 50 cents to produce. I mean, that is a you know with those costs, they are still making $2 on every packet.
They're
Excuse
$15.
me, $2.50 on every packet.
They're $15.
They're $15 for a pack of cards.
Yep, pack of 32, 35 cards.
Oh, well, it's double my expectation then. So yeah, they're making a hell of a lot of money on those. There's a very high profit margin. It is literally paper and ink. These are not complex to produce, really. This is not, building a car, building a computer. And you're not using any rare earth metals. That is, hard to get your hands on.
Yep, and just for context for any listeners, that maybe I pulled up the wrong thing, but I clicked the first link of Magic the Gathering booster pack, green deck. Like that's what it was. It was $15.
Nice.
So maybe
So
maybe I
yeah,
clicked the wrong thing.
yeah, I don't know the exacts on this, but you're talking about paper with ink on it and
Yeah.
selling it as a luxury item. Like you're going to make a killing if people will buy it, and people do buy it. So it is safe to say that as far as profit margins go, the Magic the Gathering side is going to be more profitable than the D&D side, where you are going to have riders. You're going to have your sensitivity reader, apparently. I mean, God forbid you didn't have a sensitivity reader, Colton. I don't know what we do with our podcast without, a sensitivity listener.
A lot of people would have their jimmies rustled.
Oh, so many wrestle jimmies. At, at least, a few hurt feelings. And oh my God, we could never live with ourselves, could we?
I know I couldn't.
Yeah. Well, given that you do have those kinds of expenses clearly associated with one of these, well, suffice to say that on the D&D side of operations, you're going to have more expenses. So ultimately, there is a we don't have all the data to be able to say this, but it is entirely possible. It is well within the realm of reason to think that the D&D side of operations for the fiscal year of 2023, if you remove third-party content and take into account previous year's losses, actually lost money for in-house productions.
Good problem.
And given that the year before that you had seen WotC attempt something like the OGL, which is really only justified if you are not in a very good financial position or if you are desperate for to increase cash flow, that is a problem. And that them doing that lends credibility to this theory in my eyes. But it's just a theory.
Tabletop game theory.
Well, something like that. Less the game is less important than the business. But yes, so that good financial news that you get at the end of 2023 comes with some real heavy considerations. But now we move into 2024, and I'm sure nothing went wrong this year. I mean, we're only barely into it, Colton.
Surely.
Surely, surely. Well, all goes well, Colton. Baldur's Gate keeps selling copies, keeping the lights on. But then, in March 2024, Larian Studios announces they would not do another D&D game. And there's talk they're not a company that generally does DLC, but they appear to want to be done with it.
Well,
And
there was talks of DLC, like that wasn't off the table, right? And then
yeah,
something happened to change that. But usually what Larian does is they, rather than DLC, they just fully completely flesh out the game in like one huge update, usually like a year after, and call it like the complete edition and then sell that, right?
yeah,
And I don't even think they're doing that with Baldur's Gate.
yeah, that's what I got with Divinity, and that was a great game. Seriously, if you like Baldur's Gate 3, go give Divinity Original Sin a try. It's a fantastic game with a very good soundtrack and
Oh,
all sorts of
amazing
things.
soundtrack.
But now this opens up another problem suddenly for WotC, which is in light of Baldur's Gate 3, you had the game seemingly heavily criticized by a lot of major developers, saying that this game presents an unreasonable expectation of, you know, what should be available in a normal game. Well, there's a problem. Larian did it. They did it seemingly on a relatively minor budget, and it's gained quite a bit of notoriety. Meaning that if somebody were to take this up and then fail, certainly it would provide some short term income, but it would very likely lead to long term damage for the developer
And the franchise as a whole.
and the franchise as a whole. Exactly.
You have to go up like for anybody that doesn't play computer games, you're going up
Yeah.
against a game that out of like 7 or 8, huge Emmy award winning type things, right? But like video game edition of like those
Yeah.
award shows. Out
Yeah.
of all 7 or 8 of those, it was unanimous game of the year in every one. And it will likely be remembered in like 10 years as like one of the best CRPG games of all time.
Yeah. It's certainly up there with games like, what is it, the third Witcher,
Mm-hmm.
where, I mean, there are studios that have been known to do the unreal with games. I mean, what is it? The second Witcher game was made for like $2 million. Some like it's a really good game, but the second one in that series was made for next to no budget, using old equipment and presumably vodka and Slavic magic. That is like the best I can describe it. Like it should not have been as good as it was considering the minuscule budget, but it was. And that company then produced The Witcher 3. So, it's very hard shoes to step into, and I'm not sure any studio will want to do it in the near future.
especially
Meaning that,
with the layoffs that we talked about earlier that Hasbro did, which according to articles from Larian, that like everybody that they worked with from like the team that helped them, flesh out the D&D world that they made, like almost none of them are still there.
yes, I have some theories about that, and we'll get to that sort of whenever we sort of wrap things up and sort of point out problems.
Yeah, it's just even, compounding that issue of like having incredibly big shoes to fill, and then, also discovering that the feet that you're trying to fill in those shoes with don't have toes.
All right. So next up, we get another month, Colton. We get one more month, and
With
then we
no
get another
controversy?
problem.
Oh no.
We got another problem. Remember how we said that Cynthia Williams was the person that took over for Chris Cox as the head of WotC?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with 2 weeks' notice, President Cynthia Williams leaves as president of WotC, a billion-dollar company, to become the lead of Funko Pop, which has a market cap of 431 million. There is no world where that is an upgrade.
I mean, it might be an upgrade, like personally, but like prestige wise, no.
Very much a hit on prestige. And what Funko Pop is kind of floundering right now, as I understand it.
I mean, I always thought they were
So
a joke, but whatever.
I'm inclined to agree. But yeah, and she only gave a 2 weeks notice. Now, let me be clear. I don't think she left that position to go to Funko Pop for a second. I think she wound up going to Funko Pop, but I think this was a case of being voluntold to get the hell out.
Mm.
And I'm not sure what's happening there. But don't worry, we're going to be talking about the presidency of WotC in just a second. It's got to be covered a bit more. So next up, just this month, just a few days ago, actually, uh, another book was released for D&D, which was largely being sold for nostalgia. I've read through it, quite honestly. Uh, what was the last of the new Star Wars movies?
I don't even know anymore.
The Rise of Skywalker. Ugh, what a disaster. Like I've never actually managed to sit and watch it. I have read the plot, and I feel stupider for having done so. It's Fetch Quest the movie. Well, what The Rise of Skywalker is for Star Wars, this new book is for D&D.
A nail in the coffin.
No, but it's just not that good. Quality wise, it's kind of convoluted and all over the place.
Mm.
It doesn't really make all that much sense. But the problem in this is that throughout all of this time period, uh, WotC has been trying to push their digital marketplace and digital services as being the core foundation of the company. But due to an update to their online store, uh, whether this was intentional or not, I don't know whether this was something intended to happen. But there have been people from within WotC say that this was because of an error. So presumably due to a technical issue in updating their online marketplace, uh, which happened as they were splitting the US market from all other markets on where things are ordered online. If you pre-ordered this book, you were supposed to get a digital copy early if you, well, it was just generally if you ordered early. Well, presumably this hit, and all of a sudden, if you ordered after a certain date, you weren't going to get it. So the problem is that in trying to convince people to go, oh, buy this digital product, buy this digital product, buy it digitally. And obviously they do that because they don't have to deal with a hard product. They don't have to eat up footprint. It saves them a lot of money. And they don't have to deal with logistics costs. There's so many advantages to just selling digitally. But people purchased it digitally and didn't get the product because they screwed it up.
Just literally being
Either
scammed.
so either they were straight up scamming with what they were saying they were going to do, or it was a technical issue displaying that they didn't have the ability to actually, manage this digital marketplace that they say is the core of what they do. So of course their response has been to ignore it and hope it goes away. I think we would both probably recommend that under the circumstances.
Well, you said
Just
this
wait
was
for
a
the
couple
media.
of days ago. Has it not been fixed?
No, they're not intending to fix it. From what I understand, they realized that it was a problem, or what I'm sort of assuming in this situation. There's nothing really fixed. Nobody's talking about it. But people would go to their like their Discord or contact customer service, and they would just be given a rigmarole or have posts banned on forums and deleted because they didn't want any attention about it up.
Well, what are you supposed to? What is your recourse then for
You
being
don't.
scammed?
You don't have one. And they claimed that this was updated on the 2nd of March, or excuse me, on the 2nd of May to indicate that if you ordered it past a certain date, you would not get the pre-order stuff.
Oh, so it hasn't come
But
out yet. This is like the early edition.
it has the pre-order has come out. You're still going to get it
Oh
if
yeah,
you
yeah.
pre-ordered it on the time, but you're not getting the pre-order thing. Which, okay, scummy.
No, that's just false
Well,
advertising.
well, yes. Ultimately, if it is a error, some kind of technical error, it can likely, like, you wouldn't be able to take them to court over it. They would just chalk it up to technical issues, and we'll call it act of God would probably come into play, which is a legal term for things that are beyond your control to, handle.
I mean, it's
Uh,
not beyond their control to just respond to the support email with a PDF of the file that you were supposed to get.
well, this is true. That would be, one way to handle it.
You could set up an
But
automated system to do that.
but here's the problem, and I think that might have been done. And this was supposed to this all came about, I believe, on the 7th. But you remember how we just talked about Cynthia Williams leaving as president?
Mm-hmm.
We still have no president of WotC.
Okay.
So I'm not sure there is anybody to actually give instructions.
Well, I mean, presumably, like, the department heads could be like, hey, set up an email if you get, an order number and just auto reply with a PDF. Doesn't take that much. I mean, like,
Well, yes, but I'm assuming they don't want to do the PDF because then people will just immediately share. It happens anyway.
if you're gonna get it anyways, people that are immediately gonna share it are gonna share it anyways.
Yeah, I know, but I never claimed they were smart. I mean, we've actually sort of proven that they aren't. Uh, but these kind, but this like just seems like a real lack of leadership and clearly putting on public display that what you are saying is the heart and soul of your company, you are incapable of managing in a responsible manner. Like it is staggering. It is utterly staggering.
It's gotten to the point where it's not funny anymore.
We are like this is like it's hysterical. Like going down this, but it's to a like it just keeps going. Like with Hasbro, I wanted to find something bad, but the worst thing I could find was that Disney screwed, and that cost them a lot of money. Meanwhile, there is not a thing in this list that is not a decision that would fall to Wizards of the Coast. None of this is the kind of thing that the C-suite really gives a shit about. Generally, they've got enough on their platter. I mean, at any given time, like a CEO makes a ton of money. And the reason is because at any given time, any moderately disgruntled shareholder has that CEO in the crosshairs. And if they're a large shareholder, they'll get their revenge. And they can utterly ruin that person's reputation. So they are having to play a very high level game of corporate politics. It is a very stressful job. It is, in many ways, a very risky job, as if you fail, you will probably never have employment again. You will be forever regarded as a failure. You get a shot, and that's it.
Yeah,
Unless you're,
I don't know if I
but
agree
this,
with that part, but okay.
I mean, if you're good, you can come back. I mean, for what it's worth, Bob Iger did grow Disney considerably during his tenure. He's lost it a lot of that growth recently, a lot of it, but he was oversaw that growth. And I hate to say it, but I still respect the man. There's something impressive about working your way up from like set carpenter to CEO. You've got to appreciate that.
It's a little romantic.
Yeah, it's a little romantic, dude. That's a bit badass. Like that's pretty awesome. But back on topic here, like every single one of these things has the hallmarks of being an internal decision. And I can't really like you might have I've heard some people say that, the digital side of, you know, WotC gets a lot of instruction come down from, you know, subordinates of the CEO that work for Hasbro Central. And no doubt they do. They probably get a lot of feedback from them, but they don't answer to them. They answer to the CEO. And I mean, I suppose there would also be cases where they'd answer to HR for, I don't know, various company policies. But still, I like like it just dumbfounds me that this is the case. And I think looking at all of this stupidity, all of this stupidity, all of these things that are easily avoidable, and they did them anyway. It didn't matter whether they took one side or the other. in the culture war. Pissing off either side is stupid. It costs you money. Not having some type of quality control for your products. Who do they think they are? Bethesda? If you have if you have played the if you have, cast aside all logic and reason and dipped your toes into the culture war, you you have, given the appearance of siding with the left, you don't give the appearance of corporate greed, thus pissing them off too. You don't ruin a perfectly good brand by modernizing it. Disney tried it and it failed. Amazon tried it and it failed. Every major studio and everything in the entertainment industry has tried to do this and it keeps on failing. But, maybe you're special. Maybe you'll make it work this time. Then, you, after you have spent the money to buy a market, you ostracize all the people that make stuff for you so they won't make it anymore. And then you turn those competitors, those producers into competition. That's like, and you piss off everybody. Everybody. What the hell? Like, that's three detriments all at once. You don't turn your largest you don't tell your largest block of patron customers to casually go get screwed. Uh, you don't trying to claim if you're saying something is inherently racist, you shouldn't be just overtly racist to make it inherently racist. You should be able to look at your competition, well, not even competition, but other things that are trying to appeal to the same crowd, and see, you should be able to see what they fail at and try to avoid it, not embrace it, throw caution against the wind, say screw it, dig in your heels and just hope for the best. Well, you press a big red screw it button and double down. If you rely upon artists to create products for you, maybe you shouldn't piss them off. If you are a company that produces a product and you create another product in another wing that relies on that same product, you should have the know-how not to screw up outsourcing. Dare I say that, and I will give Hasbro credit for this in regards to the profits. They have already said they expect WotC to generate far less profit this year. They got well ahead of it on that. So there's another point for Hasbro. Next, you should generally try to cultivate very good relationships with a third party contractor that makes you as much money as Larian made WotC. But clearly that didn't happen. Next up, if you have someone very high up within a company, someone whose decisions are needed on a daily basis to make things work, you should generally have an heir apparent, which is something that is clearly not transpired, given that there is still no president of WotC. If you are going to claim that a certain segment of your services are the heart and soul of what your company does now, then maybe, just maybe, you should be a bit more competent at them. You should be able to, hold that up with pride instead of having to, cover things up. And again, I'll say I would have been, under the circumstances, I would have told them to hide it, because that's not the kind of thing you want becoming terribly visible. And like, are you as dumbfounded as I am, Colton?
I just don't understand how they haven't been, told to be better.
Do better than you are currently doing. And, I've got some thoughts on this. And obviously, I'm a third party. I'm outside looking in. I can look at the numbers I get. I can look at people. I can look at a lot of things. And I can sort of, draw conclusions based upon experience. And I cannot, you know, wholeheartedly say something that this is the cause. But all of these problems seem to stem from a certain level of poor decision making and a certain level of leadership problem. And well, let's be clear, a lot of these problems started when Cynthia Williams took over. So that is something that could be a problem. And it could have led to a lot of this. I don't know. But I will say that at least to some level, she deserves a good bit of the blame for this. But at the same point, she probably also deserves a good bit of credit for Monopoly Go. And that was very profitable. So she's been bad for two brands and seemingly very good for another wing of the operation. Or she was. But whenever I'm talking about shit leadership, Colton, what is an artist good at?
Presumably making art.
Yes. And what is a leader good at?
That's kind of philosophical, Robert.
Well, yes, you can just give me a dumb answer. It's a very simple question.
Leading.
Exactly. Now, does being a good artist necessarily give you the skills of being a good leader?
Not all the time and not most of the time, but it's possible.
Mm, Not most of the time is correct. It doesn't really give them to you, but you might develop those skills.
Yeah.
You
Depends on the
don't need,
company.
well, it depends on a lot of factors. But what I kind of view as the problem in all of this, and what I see as sort of being the root cause of a lot of these problems, is that, Colton, let's say that you were looking for a director of an art department, would you need someone who is primarily an artist or someone who is primarily a leader?
Probably primarily a leader, but okay.
Exactly. Look at something like project management. You don't necessarily need to know the skill of the people that are working for you, that you are coordinating. What you do need to do is be able to manage a project, meet time constraints and fall within a budget. That
Mm-hmm.
that is what you need to do. You can be the director of an art department, you can be the director of a music department, you can be the, I don't know, the director of the joint chiefs of staff. Like, it doesn't matter. Those skills, well, I'm not going to pretend all of these are the same job by any means, but the core skills you need are the same. They are leadership skills. And what I am, what I genuinely view as the problem in all of this, sort of at least one of the root causes of this issue, is that in the world of creative writing and art, all of which are, fundamental to something like a D&D, artists only really progress so far. They are essentially the line worker of a factory. They might make more than a line worker in a factory, but they are still producing a product that is then used. Your writers are producing a product that is then used, and it's being assembled, by someone else. Hell, they're not even the people assembling on a line. They are the people, mining the minerals that are used to build that product. And the reality is that there's not much advancement. And what this looks like is a case of, you know, let's say that I have an art department and there is somebody in that art department who has been there a long time. They feel like they deserve a promotion. I feel like they deserve a promotion, but I don't have a promotion I can give them normally. So I give them, director of the art department. They're an artist. They may or may not have those leadership skills. All of this seems to be cases of people elevated to a position that requires a skill set they do not have. And it is a very real problem in creative industries because your artist will get disgruntled. Why did I not get that promotion? And it's just a harsh reality. Being a good artist does not mean that you are qualified to lead an art department because how do I put this? If you hire an artist to be the director of an art department, they're just going to view the artist in that, or the art department manager. They are going to see themselves as, art manager. And if you put somebody that's more of a project manager over it, they are going to view themselves as department manager. It doesn't matter to them whether it's art or what have you. And like, you can point to this sometimes in the gaming industry as well. I believe BioWare was a good example, the company that created the first two Baldur's Gates, where you had people in the writing department promoted to, being the director of writing and actually worked their way further up to the point where instead of actually having, people discuss plots and discuss dialogue and how that would be implemented, instead you basically had one person exercising veto power when somebody in that position, you're a department director for something creative, is not necessarily a creative, and their central role is not as a creative. They should have facilitated the work within that department without actually interfering in it, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of these problems seem to be where, somebody got, promoted to, I don't know, art department leader. And then, your music writing director and what have you got elevated as well. And then you start opening up other positions and you keep hiring internally. And, in this case, you had a booming market. So there were still sales. But as you keep promoting people that aren't really qualified, they sort of dwindle. Well, those sales dwindle. And now you are left with a staff that isn't largely qualified for what they are doing.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with you on the sense of management bloat, right?
Uh,
But I don't know. I think a lot of the people that are the creatives of some of these industries, whether it be tabletop gaming or regular gaming or any sort of hobby stuff, let's say, right?
yeah,
Those people that are on the creative side of it are usually the heart and soul types. And that, like, let's say that, what you're saying, like they get promoted out of actually having a say within whatever they were doing before, right? And now they're
yeah,
just in a leadership position, then like you the end customer is going to feel that, right? Especially if they were, usually someone that gets promoted like that is a major contributor, right?
well, they are a major contributor, but the problem is that the creative process that happened before stops happening so much
Yeah, that's.
as and that generally is a very negative effect on a product.
I'm just saying, like, I think it's okay if those people get promoted into the more business side because they might, not make the. This is more in gaming than I don't know if about Wizards of the Coast, especially, but like a lot of the business people that like get put into do anything in gaming is just like, oh, this is just the end of what was fun, and now it's no longer fun as the rule of what we're making as a game. It's how can this make more money? Which,
Yes,
as a business, I'm sure is the goal, but
that
they would have made more money by making something fun than making something that can extract profit.
yes. In the current case, though, just because of dysfunction, it's showing signs of not the appropriate skill set.
Hmm,
So, I mean, if you have one or two people like that, that's fine. But it feels, and I don't like saying that, but it feels like a lot of these problems seem to be caused by people elevated above their ability to function. Um,
I don't. I'm
I
not.
mean,
I'm not seeing where that's coming from in the problems that we talked about. Like,
all right, I'll give you an example.
well, like how
I'll
is
give you
like
an
a
example.
writer, being promoted to something? Like, why would a writer be promoted to like the logistics department with like the
Well,
Chinese cards?
not the logistics department necessarily. That that's an odd one out. But I don't know the background of some of these people. But let's say, for example, the whole Radiant Citadel situation.
Mm-hmm.
Again, we're not commenting on quality. We're not saying it's right or wrong. We're simply pointing out that by virtue of what it was, it came off as divisive and stepping into a situation that should not have been stepped in for financial reasons. But yeah, so somebody okayed that, and somebody with half a lick of business sense would have known not to. So whoever was there was probably not qualified. Going into the Dragonlance issue where they changed something significant in the eyes of viewers to the lore, which changed the feel of the entire thing. That has the case of somebody who is over a writing department basically saying, no, what I want happens, where they view themselves as the director of artists. And so they get the final say.
Yeah, I come at that from the exact same
Like,
thing, but from the opposite angle. Like somebody that was familiar with the franchise wouldn't have done that. That's where I see that.
I mean, I think they were probably familiar with it, but this seems like a case of either not an, yeah, I don't know.
Like to me, that just seems like someone that's just like brought in from outside. That's just like, yeah, put it on the box so you can play cleric now. What's up? You know, like extra features. We'll sell that shit. That's marketing right there.
Marketing.
You know what I mean? Like that. Obviously, it's either someone that didn't give a shit and like wanted to change the lore, which would be from your point, right? Or from where I see it, where it's just like someone that's entirely unfamiliar with it, but like wanted to put their legacy on the box and being like, I made clerics playable. How about that? Where's my applause?
And I mean, hell, let's keep on. I mean, these are all stupid decisions. These are all decisions that anybody that like, I mean, it could just be nepotism. Maybe it's just, they like this artist and they're promoting them. But a lot of these seem to be cases of people who are not qualified for their job being in those jobs because this shouldn't happen. I mean, think about how many levels of failure you had to have in order to essentially get mixing races is racist. What, like, what
Well, that's like
glorious,
multiple
what,
levels of stakeholders approving that. That's not just like the
not even necessarily,
sensitivity department.
not necessarily stakeholders, but it's like, how many managerial levels did somebody went in, had to go in there with like, you know, like, I want to applaud this person because like, whoever came up with this has to be arguably the greatest troll of all time. I'm going, like, imagine the pair of balls you must have to go to people with, I don't know, just random quotes from like the KKK and say, "Hey, do this or you're racist." Like, just it's unbelievable. Like, I'm strangely proud of that one just because it is so outlandish. Like, the
There's a
sheer,
third option, Robert.
which is,
Hostile takeover via the sensitivity department and possibly HR hiring. They just
that isn't, that is entirely possible. It's something we don't really get into much, but frankly, there is a lot of political bias in HR departments.
I have seen some rotten hiring like by HR. Rotten.
Yes, like, we're privy to it. I mean, we've both done HR. We've done HR for political entities. I mean, sabotage is real. And so you are extremely careful and you qualify people even on the grounds that, oh, there might be a case that they are here as a saboteur. Like, you don't risk it. You just don't. Otherwise you get flirted and we're not going to speak about that. But
Saboteur is in the HR department.
no, the saboteur was God, Florida, what a mess. Yeah, we're not going to go into detail on that one.
But
But
who
yeah,
was home?
we oh God.
uh,
Yeah, we've seen our share of sabotage. But you do see biased hiring practices in that regard. Um, it's not happy, but it is reality. Um, and that's not actually illegal. Your political ideology is not a protected class. But I mean, again, going back to then let's throw out the whole Lord of the Rings blunder. Like it is literally in the news at the time period how badly that show did. And what do? They make the same stupid mistakes. Somebody authorized that.
Uh,
Somebody authorized that. And it makes no sense. I mean, I get using AI to create artwork. I get that. That does save money. That saves a lot of money. It's just another group they pissed off in their seemingly endless quest to piss off anybody that likes their products. But there's another matter in all of this that I think has to be delved into a little bit regarding the current situation at WotC, specifically related to the recent issue with the book with the pre-order problems. And that is that you know how well, a few years ago, Colton and I did some work in Texas. And part of me willingly going there was the fact that Colton went as well. And frequently, whenever you get a new leader for a company, they sort of clear house a bit and they put in people they want. So bringing in people that you have worked with before, that you work well with, and that you can rely on is pretty normal. It's not abnormal to clear house. So my gut tells me that in relationship to some of the issue with the pre-order matters recently is likely because you've got a whole hell of a lot of apathy from a lot of people in important places in WotC right now.
you said hell of a lot
Because
of
that,
apathy. Okay,
yes, because you know, come a new president, a lot of those people are likely going to get replaced.
makes sense.
I mean, I know I would, but it feels like somebody needs to, come in and lay down the law and I don't know. Somebody needs to come in and point out this is a stupid mistake. Never do it again. Because each of these is a stupid mistake that is easily avoidable. Each and every one of them. And none of these are really repeating problems.
Well, I
I
bet
mean,
also nobody really wants to you know all of the projects that they have ongoing that are from previous leadership are still ongoing. Like they're not going to be canceled upon a new president, right? So
it depends on how much is invested and if they think they'll lose money.
yeah, I mean,
If they think
it's
that
very
it is
rare.
cheap, you say that, but it's not all that rare.
Well, I'm thinking like
Uh,
something that's like 80% done already. You know?
Lord God, what was it? What Warner Brothers Discovery canceled a movie that was already complete and edited because they thought it would cause more damage.
Yeah, but that was newsworthy. It's not
Yes,
all that common. That's what I'm saying.
it's not common. Disney has done it with multiple films. The thing is, you usually just don't hear about it.
Hmm.
Uh, you don't hear about it much because it's not something they want to brag about. It's not a good look in the eyes of the shareholders. With Warner Brothers Discovery, I believe it was the CEO wanting to make an example and basically say you're going to produce content that meets my standards, otherwise you get the whack, whack, whack.
In your opinion, does Watsy need that?
Well, I'm going to add another factor into this that seems to display a lack of leadership skill. Now, I'm going to assume a lot of our listeners don't remember Mr. Eisner as the head of Disney. Eisner, in my eyes, is the arguably one of the greatest CEOs of our time. The man was brilliant in that role. He essentially brought about Disney's golden age. He brought it out. He brought it. It was in decline. He saved it and brought it to the top of its game. And he did it, during about a 10-year window or so, I believe. Movies like Lion King, Beauty and the Beast, I believe Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, a lot of the most popular films of Disney at the time came out under his tenure. And a lot of that credit goes to him. And whenever he would speak publicly, like he had a certain manner of speaking, and it very much inspired confidence. Like he's not Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton really is that good of a public speaker. Politics, politics be damned on that. That's not a matter of like an endorsement for an individual or otherwise. It's just he was that good of a public speaker. But Eisner had the ability to, speak to the consumers of his product in a way that seemed to indicate that, he cared about the quality of the product, and it went a long way. He built a lot of trust in Disney. And dare I say, a lot of that goodwill is what's still holding them together today. But if you look at the kind of people that, get paraded out for videos with, you know, for on behalf of Wizards of the Coast, it look, I'm not trying to insult people here. They don't inspire that kind of confidence in product quality. They don't. They, in a lot of ways, they seem out of. And
You're
again, I'm
you-
not
you're cutting
trying.
out. What out of what?
They seem out of place. They, it's like they're not used to being, in front of a camera and speaking to customers, or speaking in a way that inspires confidence from customers. And that's an important skill. If you are producing a product and you are speaking on behalf of it, you need to inspire that confidence, which, you know, that tells me these people don't really have. Like that's a very common leadership skill, is the ability to speak publicly. And it seems to be something that you're seeing lacking in a lot of these people. And I mean, I'm far from an example of the best public speaker, but still, I don't know. Maybe I'm just sort of grasping at something there, but it's just a gut instinct. There are just patterns that I recognize. I've seen worse public speakers. I've seen people that get up in front of a crowd and immediately vomit because they just can't take it. But the lack of inspiring confidence, I do believe, is a big problem. Because if you can't inspire confidence, you don't really have all that much for leadership ability. Because that's basically like one of the most important things that you do as a leader. What are your thoughts, Colt?
I think we've gone on a very long tangent.
I know. Like I feel like we've at this point I feel like we've kind of shit on Watsy and their people. And strangely enough, somehow, even with all the stupidity we've pointed out, Disney does all of it and somehow worse.
Well, they have a lot more capital to burn. Capital and goodwill, right?
Yeah, admittedly, okay, like the only area where I'll say that maybe Watsy did it worse was like taking Klan propaganda as gospel because if not, you're racist. I think that somehow beats Disney's. You shouldn't hire people with dwarfism to play dwarves because that's bigoted, and you just shouldn't have them in a movie.
Huh?
Yeah. So like every single problem that Watsy has is something you can point to being present in Disney. Like it's part of the reason we did this. But we'll have to do a video on Disney at some point just to sort of try and touch on it. Like we could make 50 videos on all the stupidity of Disney. Like it is just rampant, just poor decision after poor decision. But, you know, is there anything else you think needs to be said, Colton?
No, I think I'm good. What about you?
How about you, imaginary friends? Colton,
Excellent point.
my imaginary friends are looking at me funny. I feel weird.
Time to take your
It's like
meds.
it's like they're undressing me with their eyes.
Definitely time to take the meds.
Yeah, I think it is too. Well, anyway, to those of you poor bastards still listening, thank you for doing so. We hope to entertain you again, and we also hope that maybe possibly you learned something from our ramblings at 4:30 in the morning, because this is about the time period we actually, don't get bothered with phone calls and have the time for such things normally. As you've seen tonight, we occasionally get interrupted. And, well, anyway, well, everybody, we hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you very much for listening.
Have a good
Take care,
one.
everybody.